Welcome to the 10th Patron-only live stream on Alt-Shift X. The 10th is an exciting number, X, double digits. So let's do something slightly special today. We're going to be showing off the Expanse video that is very nearly done, which is exciting, and we'll also be showing off some artwork that we're going to use in the upcoming Essos video. The people in the Unseen Westeros exhibition have been kind enough to provide some really nice artwork, so we'll show some of that off and talk about how we're going to be using it in the Essos video. I see there's some folks on the chat. Welcome everybody to the stream. Can you hear me okay? We have had some streaming problems before, and it currently says the stream health is poor, but let me know if this is working and I'll continue on. So what you see here is the Expanse video that we're working on. I don't think we've ever really showed the inside of a project while it's being made like this. So you're probably gonna see a lot of confusing stuff unless you're familiar with After Effects. But this is like very nearly complete. There's a complicated and unorthodox process that we go through with these videos. We create all of the visuals and put the visuals in place in this giant design that looks a bit like this before we record any audio. So we create this whole thing, and then once we've recorded the audio, we create movements within that design. So there's a little composition here called the camera, and at this point all we do is make the movements from one part of the composition to another. All of these things here are keyframes for those of you who know After Effects. And once we've created all of those movements, we then apply it to the main composition, and we start creating the timings to give it the video, which is the fun bit, but also the most complicated and difficult bit. So how's about we show a little sneak peek at the start of the video, because it's like done the first few minutes. I'll play that now. You should be able to hear a second Alt-Shift-X. The Expanse is a sci-fi book series adapted to TV. It's got politics, mystery, space battles, space Mormons, and a looming alien threat, and it's mostly based in realistic science and technology. The Expanse is set hundreds of years in the future, when humans have colonized the solar system. Earth is overpopulated and environmentally stressed, and it's governed by the United Nations. Mars is an independent power with advanced technology and military, working to terraform the Red Planet. While Earth and Mars are the big political powers, the asteroid belt is a dangerous new frontier. Millions of people live on Ceres, Eros, and other rocks, mining the belt for resources. A political network called the OPA fights for the rights of the belt against Earth and Mars. Beyond the belt, Jupiter's moons of Ganymede and Europa grow food in greenhouses. There are resorts on Saturn's moon Titan, and labs on the moons of Uranus and Neptune, the farthest outposts of human civilization. Earth, Mars, and the Belt each have distinct cultures and histories. Earth is So that's the start of the video. And I'm really happy with it. It was... a lot of thought went into arranging some of these compositions. I think this shot looks a lot nicer than what we've used for a lot of the Game of Thrones stuff. I can't really pull it up here, but this I think is a lot sleeker than what we've used before. I've become a lot more enthusiastic about like these rapid fire introduction bits, showing just a series of short clips to give you a taste of what the rest of the video is about. We never really used to do that. I think the first attempt was in like the Stranger Things video, because normally we would just go straight into like this, you know, tiled slide to slide format which is good for the main video, but I think this alternate format with the quick shots is really good for an introduction. Anyway, I could go on at length about all of the little production details, but this is a Q&A, sort of. So if you've got any questions you'd like to ask about this Expanse video, about Song of Ice and Fire, whatever, chuck them in there, and we'll answer them. But I think for the moment, I'll just point out a cool little things in the current video. Cardinal Doomsday says that the show is fairly rapid fire, and that it is. What do you think of the appearance of these PDC rounds in the Expanse? These bullets that they're firing at each other. Oh, RIP headphones, sorry. But they almost look like some kind of starship lasers or something, like some Star Wars laser fire. I don't know much about guns, but don't bullets only look bright like that if they're like special tracer rounds or something? But this is space. Who knows how this works? But yeah, I think the effects for these Expanse battles are pretty fun. So yeah, the video introduces what the Expanse is about, and then it goes through each of these, each of the relevant factions and planets in the system. And I'm really quite pleased with this shot, this composition of the whole system. It was a bit of a jigsaw puzzle putting everything together in a neat way. For a while we had like Mercury and Venus here. But I think this is a nice shot. And importantly, it allows us to frame Mars, Earth, and the OPA all in one neat shot, because that's what the video's about, and that's what we talk about. And oh yeah, of course, the other thing is that I got to speak to Daniel Abraham, who is one half of James S.A. Corey, who is the author of The Expanse. One half, not as in a Siamese twin, but as in Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham are the two authors of The Expanse, who collectively call themselves S.A. Corey. And Daniel was awesome. He spent time answering all these questions and just chatting about stuff, and providing feedback on the script as it was at that point. And so there are lots of little adjustments that we made to the video based on his advice, which is just awesome. If only George Martin would give a call, but you know, one day. So this bit of the video introduces Earth, and one of the things that Daniel suggested we emphasize is the concept of basic assistance on Earth in the Expanse, which is like this welfare system that provides food and water and shelter and stuff for free. And Daniel wanted me to emphasize that there's no money in this welfare system. You don't get money, you only get food and water and shelter and stuff. And because of that, there's not as much choice or freedom involved in being on basic. And so that sort of affects this whole sort of cultural malaise that Earth has. It feels stagnant. And the way basic assistance works is a part of that. And then we talk about... Oh yeah, the other thing that was fascinating with Daniel, talking about this shot. Because in this part of the video, we're saying that the Earth, for all of its failings in the Expanse, it's still the home planet of humanity, and it's still unique in that it's got nature, it's got an open sky, you can breathe free air, and Earth is still the only place where you can do that in the Expanse. And I asked Daniel about this shot, because it seemed to me implausible that there were any places like this left on Earth in the time of the Expanse, because there are lines saying that, you know, Baltimore hasn't seen a tree in 100 years or something. So it seemed crazy to me that there would be this much greenery so close to New York. And Daniel was saying that, well, you know, this is an exceptional place because this happens to be the home of Jules Pierre Mao, who's one of the most powerful and rich people in the world of the Expanse. And Daniel pointed out this wall that lies along the edge of Jules's home, which represents the fact that this is a deeply unequal world, and the greenery and the beauty and the nature of Earth is available to some, but not to most in the Expanse. And the wall is sort of representative of that. And that was really cool. I hadn't thought of it that way, and partly for that reason we included this shot in the video. Yeah, like you say, Cardinal, in the chat, you got to be rich to afford the plants and the sky, which is true for some people now, depressingly enough, I think. But then, yeah, we also talk about Mars and stuff. This is a shot from the Expanse Origins comic book, which is like a tie-in to the TV show. And I like including different media in a video like this. It's nice to have a comic book page to break up all of the video clips. Probably unnecessarily. We actually photoshopped this image, because on this caption here it says Mars 5 years ago. And I didn't want to include the 5 years ago because I thought it might confuse people a little bit, because at this point we're talking about the colonization of Mars, and if I included the 5 years ago, people might think that the colonization of Mars started 5 years ago, which is a super minor little thing. But I think it was worth editing for the sake of clarity. Rega asks, what made you reach out to the writer? Bold move. Well, ideally, I mean, there's no reason not to reach out to anyone, really, in 2018. It is amazing what the internet can facilitate. Like, Twitter is made for just saying hi to cool people, making cool stuff, and, 99% of the time, you won't get a response, but sometimes you do, and you can do cool shit. Specifically with the Expanse, I had seen that there's a YouTube channel called Stardock, and Stardock specializes in very analytical, detailed analyses of science fiction spaceships. You should go check him out. He is an expert on fictional spaceships, and he collaborated with the creators of the Expanse TV show and created a bunch of videos about Expanse spaceships, like the Razorback, Julie Mao's ship, and the Rocinante and stuff. And the actual TV show provided visuals, and the Stardock contributed canon information to the Expanse universe. They got the sort of official blessing, touch on high from Sci-Fi or whoever, and it's official canon now that I think it was I think Stardock said the manufacturer of the Razorback spaceship is a certain name which relates to Greek mythology in a way that's relevant to Persephone or someone who's relevant to Julie Mao. Just a really cool subtle detail that the YouTuber Stardock got to add to the Expanse mythos, and that all just came from communicating with the Expanse team and making stuff happen. So, partly that, and Stardock encouraged me to reach out, and Daniel was kind enough to respond and give some of his time. So that's awesome, and I think that's part of why the internet is so bloody cool. Rega, that is Stardock with a K at the end. Stardock. Cool channel. Doomsday in the chat reckons that the Expanse Origins comic was a trip, don't you think? Yeah, there is so there's 5 chapters in this comic book, each corresponding to the origin story of a character from the Expanse, each of the Rosie crew and Miller. And specifically the chapter about Amos is pretty wild. Amos is such a complicated, dark character, and we're given an appropriately complicated, dark chapter for him. It's like this fever dream game show where Amos is being questioned by this game show host in his own mind about some of the traumatic incidents of his youth. And it's very there's an appearance of a tardigrade, a moss piglet, And there is a devil pin thing that Amos wears in the show, but which is actually given this whole symbolic backstory in the comic book. And it's very, very dark and emotionally raw, but also really comic and strange and silly in a lot of other ways. So that is a real fucking head trip, I'd say. Um, the comic is not great in other ways. Like, I think the artwork of the comic is kind of lacking. I'm no expert critic of comic book artwork, but it's not it hasn't got a lot of detail. It hasn't got a lot of interesting composition or anything, from what I can tell. And I think there are other reviewers who said as much. But it was still really cool to see these stories about the characters, a lot of which are really interesting. I thought Naomi's story was really cool. Miller's I was a little sort of ambivalent on. I don't think Miller's one really went all that deeper than what he is on the show. Holden's, yeah, I feel the same about Holden's actually. Holden's, at least if you've read the book, Holden's isn't all that revelatory. But yeah, Amos is crazy, and Alex is good as well. Yeah, just read the comic book if you're into the Expanse. But yeah, in any case, it's nice to use this page here. And we talk about Mars and getting independence and all of that stuff. And this shot here, I'm really pleased with. This is the line where we talk about how Solomon Epstein was the guy who invented the Epstein drive, which is this super powerful, advanced rocket technology that basically made the colonization of the solar system possible, because it could travel into the distant solar system fast enough to be worthwhile. And the guy who invented it, Solomon, he died when he tested his drive because it accelerated so fast that he couldn't turn it off, and it killed him. And there's these beautiful lines in the first chapter of Leviathan Wakes, Book 1, that says that with a good scope, you can still see Solomon's ship going at a marginal percentage of the speed of light, heading out into the big empty, the best, longest funeral in the history of mankind. Which I think is just so great and bittersweet and lovely. So I'm quite happy with this bit talking about that part of the world. And Doomsday. Yeah, I think Doomsday compares the Amos chapter of the Expanse Origins to a Batman comic. The Killing Joke is a bit like that, isn't it? I wonder if it's even a homage to the Killing Joke, because the Killing Joke has like the Joker as this sort of, game show-esque character taking what's his name, the Commissioner, through this nightmare vision hellscape. Now that I think of it, yeah, the format, the whole sort of theme, the story is, and the imagery is similar, isn't it? I wonder if that's a deliberate parallel between the Expanse Origins Amos chapter and the Killing Joke. One of the other things with this video that's a little tricky is, in the title, it's going to be The Worlds of the Expanse, no spoilers. Because I want this to be an introduction to the Expanse for people who know nothing about it. But no spoilers is a tricky and subjective term, because of course I'm talking about information from the books, which you're not going to know until you read the books. The line, as I see it, is that we don't talk about like plot details, or at least plot details past the first few chapters, or the first chapter for each character. But we do talk about some of the background lore which is explored in the novellas. So this story of Solomon Epstein, Stein, is described in the novella called Drive. And arguably talking about this stuff constitutes a spoiler of Drive. Even though, like, this stuff, like the basic story of Solomon is explained in chapter 1 of the book. So I anticipate commenters saying, this is spoilers. But I don't think any of this knowledge will impact your appreciation of the main plot of the story at all. Doomsday says mute the audio on your recording. Don't know what you mean. If it's important, please clarify. Oh, what was I going to say? So yeah, the spoiler thing's weird. The other thing about spoilers is I pained over this. So the introduction, which you heard, introduces the Expanse as having politics, mystery, space battles, space Mormons, and a looming alien threat. And describing the threat as alien is arguably a spoiler, because when I was reading Leviathan Wakes, I was thinking for a lot of the time, is the proto-molecule, is this an alien thing or is this a man-made thing? And I mean, you know, spoilers, but the answer is it's alien. But a lot of people would assume that from the start anyway. And so arguably calling it alien is a bit of a spoiler. But I asked Daniel about this. And he was saying that he reckons it's pretty fair to call it alien because, you know, this shot that we've got here, this shot is from the very first 5 minutes of The Expanse and the first chapter of Leviathan Wakes. And what we see is this abominable Lovecraftian flesh glowing monstrosity consuming and congealing and homogenizing living people, which I think most people are willing to put label as that's alien, that's whack, that's not within the normal realm of experience, and therefore it's reasonable to call it alien. And alien doesn't even necessarily mean extraterrestrial. Alien just means foreign or unknown, you know? So maybe I'm just trying to rationalize or defend, but I think calling it alien is not too much of a spoiler. And for what it's worth, Daniel, the author, said so you can blame him. I think 90% of being a YouTuber is preemptively trying to defend against angry comments. Cardinal Doomsday in the chat says, why do alien threats always loom? Yeah, they loom, don't they? They loom, or they, what else do they do? No, it's mostly loom. They all loom. Well, sometimes they haunt? Do they haunt? No, that's really just ghosts. Do they monitor, they threaten? Yeah, no, alright. You're right, Cardinal. Aliens always loom. Rega says, if you're afraid of spoilers, just stay away from YouTube entirely. Yeah. I mean, some people say that, you know, they weren't even looking for Game of Thrones videos, and yet they'll see a Alt-Shift-X title on recommended videos that says that, you know, Rhaegar is Jon's father. And that could be a spoiler for people, and that's a downer. My perspective is that the reality is that most people who are seeing Game of Thrones recommendations, especially Alt-Shift-X ones, are people who have seen Game of Thrones videos. And I think and I think the majority of people at this point who care about Game of Thrones at all are watching the show. Like, that problem of spoilers is really only relevant to someone who hasn't seen all of the show and hasn't read all of the books, but thinks they will one day. And I think that's a narrowing minority of people. But, yeah, I'd got to acknowledge that there is a possibility for people to be spoiled by stuff, and that is a downer. But the reason videos are titled like that is because people need to know what they are in order to click on them, and clicks are my breakfast, lunch, and tea. So that's kind of inevitable, I think. Cardinal suggests that aliens also encroach, which they do. They do. I feel like it's more barbarian hordes that encroach on the walls of Rome or something. Isn't that who encroaches? I'm not sure. Anyway, so this is the Expanse video. There are a few things that we're doing here that are a little bit different, or that we haven't done in a while. Most notably, I think the physics bits. One of the very early videos on Alt-Shift-X was an explanation of the Doppler effect. And now, after all these years, we're returning to a physics explainer, which is just delightful. And you know, that Doppler effect video was about a car with sound waves emanating from it to show the Doppler effect. And here we are back again with a little car image to talk about acceleration and gravity. So that's exciting. It's a bit of a blast from the past. I like to think that the image that we're using now is a little bit better than the little red sedan that we used in that Doppler effect video. You'll notice that this is a slightly tidier version of the draft imagery that we used in a Patreon post. I thought about making it fancier. You could do it more in the style of someone like Real Engineering, has quite a nice sort of like blueprint style to show his sort of engineering structural explainer stuff. I think the super minimal approach makes sense, at least for this particular application, because I want to be able to see, like, you see how this starscape is moving behind the car and the rocket. That needs to be visible, so I'd like this whole thing to be transparent, and I think that a sort of a simple line art makes sense. That said, I think we need to add some kind of like a fiery thrust thing coming out the back of this rocket, because it doesn't really look rockety enough. Maybe the shape needs to be tweaked. But for the purposes of explaining the concept of acceleration and gravity, I think this works quite well. We're actually doing some maths for these physics explainers. For example, in this bit, we're showing how a spaceship that can continuously accelerate might accelerate continuously for the first half of a trip, and then it can flip around and decelerate for the second half of the trip, so it can come to a stop and have gravity the whole time. And just to get that motion accurate, we've actually got a might not be easy to pull up, but if we just grab some of these keyframes, we want that one. The keyframes are here, and then if we go to the graph editor, we've actually got alright, that needs to be altered, because that needs to be a linear motion, or not a linear, but linear acceleration and then linear deceleration. That's what we're going to have to make that graph in order to make this an actual accurate representation of the concept we're talking about, which may or may not make sense to you as I ramble, but the point is that we're taking pains to make this an accurate description of the physics, which is not something that we normally have to do in Alt-Shift-X, but it's fun to talk about some of this real-world sciencey stuff for once. After talking about like the thrust acceleration, we talk about the spin gravity, which is a fun bit. I'll just play that bit because it's a cool bit, I think. Sometimes, though, you want gravity without having to accelerate somewhere. So another method is to rotate an object so the centrifugal force pushes you outwards. This looks nauseating, but from your perspective inside the object, you're standing still, and you've got gravity. It's like the Gravitron, that spinning carnival ride that pushes you against the walls. And you've got gravity. It's like the Gravitron, that spinning carnival ride that pushes you against the walls. Spin up a whole space station, and that force is your gravity. It's like in 2001: A Space Odyssey. But in the Expanse, so you experienced a little bit of the super low deep voice Alt-Shift-X that happens when After Effects is trying to render. But yeah, I'm really happy with the imagery here. I think this illustrates the concept in a really simple, clear way, which is the whole point of Alt-Shift-X. And anything that allows us to use footage from 2001 is a good idea. I'll note that I was so tempted to say centrifugal I prefer saying centrifugal than centrifugal. Centrifugal sounds kind of awkward and plodding, but centrifugal sounds terrific. But apparently the more accepted usage is centrifugal, and I've gotten sick of people complaining about how I used to say viscerous and HS equals HR. So for the sake of clarity, we use the accepted pronunciation. So yeah, that's the spin gravity stuff, and we talk about Miller as a belter. We talk about this is like the bit that we haven't finished yet. It's just this last little bit talking about the communication lag in the Expanse, and then talking about Holden's birth with the DNA mix of his 8 parents, which I think is a really cool bit of world building. And then that's the main content of the video. We go on to talk about the story and get people to go read Leviathan Wakes. So the video's very nearly done. I think after we finish this live stream, we'll go finish the video, upload it for patrons, and y'all can have it for 24 hours or so exclusively as a thanks for your support. So unless anyone's got any Expanse questions, I think we'll move on to Essos. The theme seems to be distant expanses going into the unknown. That seems to be the Alt-Shift-X theme at the moment, because we're not only doing space in the Expanse. On the Essos video, we are going into the far reaches of the world of Ice and Fire, so that's exciting. Gemma in the chat asks about Holden's 8 parents. Yeah, I think they allude to it in the TV show, but I don't think they ever really properly explain it. But yeah, Holden in the books at least, he is the child of 8 parents who each contributed DNA to Holden. And part of the reason for this is that on Earth, being so overpopulated, there are financial incentives from the government to not have too many kids. And so having only one kid between 8 adults allowed these 8 adults to have this big farmland, which is normally prohibitively expensive. And there's a description in the books of how the 5 fathers and 3 mothers, some of them were in couples and some of them were in polygamous triplets, and there's this whole sort of complicated social politics in Holden's life, which I suppose probably helped him be a good XO on the Canterbury, because dealing with all of those complicated relationships in a family, I think, would be very similar to dealing with complicated relationships on a spaceship. Because in the same way that people in a family usually don't just walk out of the family unit, people on a spaceship that's millions of miles from anywhere usually don't just leave the spaceship. It's a group that is, to some extent, necessarily together, and you need to learn how to navigate complicated relationships in that microcosm. And perhaps Holden's family life prepared him for that. I'll have to ask Daniel about that, actually. Holden family life, relationships, spaceship, XO. That's how Alt-Shift-X takes notes. Cardinal Doomsday in the chat asks, how many Expanse videos are you gonna do? So the original mandate, the original vote that we held was to pick a non-Game of Thrones series and to do a video on it. So that was the plan, to do a video, and then I realized that one video wasn't really sufficient to talk about the first book, because I saw the job as to talk about the first book, and then we sort of didn't. So now we're doing an introductory video, which is this video, and then we're doing a book 1 analysis video, which, for those who are paying attention, you'll notice that's actually 2 videos, but I suppose at this point I'm seeing it as 2 halves of one video, none of which answers your question. If these videos are well received by the patrons and well received by others, then we'll consider doing a 3rd Expanse video about the 2nd book and season, because there's plenty of stuff to talk about in in the second book. I think I actually might have enjoyed the second book more than the first book, and there's plenty of stuff to talk about there. So we absolutely could make more Expanse videos, but I'm happy to go with what people are into, because there's other series as well that I'd love to cover. I'd love to do Dune and Dark on Netflix. I still haven't seen, but a million people are saying it's great and you got to see it. So I'd be totally keen to do another series, and I'd be totally keen to do another Expanse video. So I'm happy to let the patrons and the subscribers choose what they prefer, I reckon. So yeah, it's possible that we'll do another Expanse video, but as ever, the primary focus, the heart of Alt-Shift-X is and will remain for the foreseeable future Game of Thrones. And so I think now's time to talk a bit about the Essos video that we're planning. So we got this lovely artwork from the Unseen Westeros exhibition, which you should all go and see if you are in or near Berlin. And oh, actually, there should be. Yeah, here we are. Okay, so the Unseen. Let's just do an ad for the Unseen Westeros exhibition, because these guys are cool. Like, these guys are concept artists who contributed artwork for the development of Game of Thrones. And this exhibition that they're running, it's totally non-profit. It's just them showing off their cool stuff, celebrating their work, and I think that's great. And so part of the purpose of this Essos video is to support them and advertise their exhibition and get some people in to see stuff. No money involved. It's just a community thing, which I think is great. So this is their promo of the exhibition, and these are the places that they've got artwork of. So there's all sorts of artwork of these obscure places far from Westeros. This over here is Westeros, for those who aren't... Oh, shit. For those who aren't familiar with the geography. This is Westeros, where most of Game of Thrones happens. This is Slaver's Bay, where Daenerys hangs around. She goes as far as, like, Karth, which is, like, out there somewhere. But there's also all of this stuff out here. The Far East, down on Sothios, all of these really exotic, strange, interesting places in the world of Ice and Fire. And the World of Ice and Fire book, the World Book, has descriptions of a lot of these places that are really interesting. And now the Unseen Westeros exhibition has artwork of a lot of these places. So this just seems like a perfect opportunity to talk about these places. So the artwork includes... There's going to be more, but the artwork includes this piece of the 5 forts. And the 5 forts are located here. Here, which is basically just at the arse end of the universe. This area out here is this cold desert. And there are all these legends about one time when the demons of the Lion of Night came from this desert here, and came into Yeti in this area, and there was this great battle by Herkun the hero who beat back the demons, and then the 5 forts were built to protect the world from the demons beyond, which for those who are paying attention will notice that's basically the story of the Long Night and the Wall. Over on the way far other side of the world, here's the Wall, and this is where the White Walkers came, and they brought darkness and death until the hero sent them back. So that's not a coincidence that the same story happens on this end of the Earth as on this end of the Earth, and that's something that we'll talk about using this beautiful art to illustrate. The 5 forts here look very ominous. I'm seeing a lot of spikes and things, what looks like blood dripping down, or maybe those are red banners. Some weird, nasty shit has been happening out here, I think, and we'll discuss that in the video. Also, like, the Bloodstone Emperor is a whole story that we haven't covered yet, who was like this evil sacrificial dude who brought doom on everyone and is maybe similar to Euron Greyjoy. It's a whole thing. We'll talk about it at some point, if not this video. One of the other pieces is Yeti. We've got some artwork of Yeti, and Yeti is Yeti's over here. And Yeti is basically the China of Westeros. Um, they're like advanced in a whole bunch of ways, and they've got this wealth and stuff. Although you've got to wonder whether you got to wonder how accurate the Maester's accounts of these distant places are. George R. R. Martin is always emphasizing the, historiography, saying that, well, this is what people think about this far distant place, but it might not be true. So, we don't know if these places really are as exotic and wild as they sound. Or maybe they are not. Here's another shot of Yeti. Here's another one here. So it's China. It's medieval China. But we'll talk more about the details of Yeti in the video. One other thing that we have to acknowledge to some extent is the whole concept of Orientalism, which is the idea that there's a long history of people from Europe and other places in the West looking at the East and seeing it in a certain narrow, stereotypical, exotifying sort of a way that can be reductive and which can connect up to all sorts of sort of racism and grossness. And in a lot of ways, George Martin's depiction of his East in The World of Ice and Fire is consistent with that. He does represent the East as this sort of exotic, wild, strange place that includes a lot of negative stuff, like, the Shadowlands, where people blood sacrifice and there's no children and there's a whole bunch of savage barbarian tribes and things, which is very similar to real world depictions of Eastern peoples by Western peoples in the real world. So, we're not going to go too far down the rabbit hole of getting political or whatever about it, because that's not really the point of Alt Shift X. But we also will acknowledge realities, and I think in this case, it's kind of too strong of a connection not to mention. So I'm not sure yet how we'll approach that in the video, but it's something that we'll think about and try to approach in a fair way. So there's a bunch of shots of Yeti, and there's this shot of a Shy, which is great, which captures the dread of this place. And there's also this place of Stigai, which I believe is a city in the Shadowlands, which looks a lot like Minas Morgul, actually, now that I think of it. Minas Morgul. Yeah, green, glowing, dark cathedral. It's funny seeing when artists draw inspiration from a particular place. There has been some people noticing that there's a piece of Dragonstone that's featured in the World of Ice and Fire book that has all these stone dragons on it, and the stone dragons on this artwork look exactly like a dragon from Skyrim, to the point where it's pretty obviously copied or traced to some extent, which of course is something that artists do and which is legitimate to some extent, but some people did not approve. Cardinal Doomsday reckons a Shy and the Shadowlands are basically Mordor, and yeah, I can see that. Except what is the Sauron of the Shadowlands? Who is the center, the cause of all this darkness? I don't know. We'll talk about it in this upcoming video. Gemma asks if the artists spoke to George R. R. Martin for inspiration with these pieces. I don't know. I would assume that anything that went into the World of Ice and Fire came from descriptions from George Martin. But yeah, I don't specifically know about these pieces and these artists, what the history there is, but I can ask and find out. That's another whole issue with Alt Shift X is with artwork, there's obviously varying degrees of closeness to the source material. Some pieces of artwork are made super, super accurate to the lore, and, you hold this sword with the left hand, and, every little detail of appearance and whatever is made as realistic as possible. And there are other pieces that are more interpretive, and diverge from the piece and make different sorts of statements and ideas, all the way to, gender bent and all the things that happen on Tumblr. And as Alt Shift X, trying to choose which pieces of artwork should be used is tricky. Because, Alt Shift X, we want it to be accurate art, because the point is accuracy to the text most of the time. But it's also fun to include some of the different stuff. And also with like obscure characters, like for instance with the Alaras Sorella Sand video, there's not a whole lot of fan art of Sorella Sand. So we didn't have as many options with some of that artwork. So yeah, there's lots of little issues and things that go into all of this stuff. Yeah, so in any case, that is what we're thinking with the Essos video. We've only got like those like 5 or 6 pieces sent over at the moment, but I'm hoping that the exhibition will be able to provide us with artwork of even more of these places. Sothios is weird. It's like Yeen has this like Lovecraftian toad statue that's super creepy. It's like this plaguey, jungly place. All sorts of weird shit happening around here that would be great to talk about, and no doubt there's some amazing artwork of it. The Bleeding Sea, there's a beautiful artwork of the Bleeding Sea in this exhibition. So yeah, lots and lots of cool stuff to talk about, which we'll be getting into after we've finished the Expanse video. I'm actually not sure of what the order of the upcoming videos will be, whether we'll do this Expanse video, then the Essos video, then the second Expanse video, or if we'll do the second Expanse video, then the Essos video. Not sure. It might depend on like when artwork's available and stuff like that. We'll see how it goes. Cardinal Doomsday and Reggae both concur that the Great Other is the equivalent of Sauron. Yeah, I mean, the Great Other, as far as has ever been indicated, lies beyond the wall, far in the far north lands of Always Winter, which seems like it's at the opposite end of the world to the region of the Five Forts and the Shadowlands, but maybe, just maybe, those two connect. This is something we talked about in the White Walkers video. The concept that maybe this globe wraps around such that this area connects to this area, thus explaining the weird parallels of the Long Night and all the stuff that happened over in the Far East. And there is a statement by George Martin at some point who said that Essos and Westeros aren't connected, but he said that in like 1999 or something. And personally, I'm hoping that he might have changed his mind after that point before he actually did this world building over here. But who knows? We will have to wait for wins. Rege asks if Sothios is Africa. Yeah, I mean, theoretically. I mean, the geography is basically such that Westeros is like England and Scotland. If you actually get Scotland and wrap it around under England, it looks pretty much like that. And then the free cities are like the sort of, you know, developed Enlightenment Europe, Renaissance Europe or thereabouts. And then Slavers Bay is like Middle East, which again, you know, the Orientalists might consider problematic. And then there's China, which is Yiti, and then yeah, Sothios is then Africa. Although the Summer Isles also has African-looking people, so the Summer Isles are sort of part of Africa, I suppose. Although I'll note that Sothios, you know, it's a jungly climate, which I don't know if that really corresponds to Africa, or I mean, what do they call the top of Africa? The not sub-Saharan Africa, the pre-Saharan Africa. Is that? I don't think there's jungles around Egypt. Rega says that Australia is non-existent. Well, there's always Ulthos, the most mysterious continent of all. Maybe there are Game of Thrones kangaroos bouncing around on Ulthos. They call crocodiles lizard lions. I wonder what George R. R. Martin would call kangaroos. Something hilarious, I don't doubt. Cardinal Doomsday asks if Stygia comes from the word Stygian, which I'm probably mispronouncing, and which is defined as the river Styx in Greek mythology, which is the river that runs through Hades, the underground, the underworld, where the dead lurk. Yeah, my guess is that there's a connection there. And, you know, thematically, with the magic of the World of Ice and Fire, like, what does it mean if the Shadowlands are the land of the dead? And how does that relate to the Lands of Always Winter and the White Walkers? Like, do not they represent death? There's a lot of dark history down in the Shadowlands, which will be exciting to explore in the Essos video. If you got any more questions, chuck them in the chat. Personally, I am eager to finish this Expanse video. I think we could get a video up for the patrons quite soon, which is exciting. Oh, Cardinal Doomsday says that there are 4 rivers in Hades. Let's look that up. River Styx. What are the other ones called? So the River Styx is the principal river in the Greek underworld. What are the other rivers of Hades? The 5 rivers of the realm of Hades. So there's Acheron, which is the river of sorrow. Cocytus or Cocytus, the river of lamentation. Phlegethon, the river of fire. Leth, the river of oblivion. And Styx, the river of hate. Wow, that is some potent shit. The Greeks were really edgy when they were coming up with these names, eh? No, that's cool. I'm sure someone's like named like a band or like some fantasy thing after those names, because they're pretty cool. Although I don't know how you make Phlegethon sound sound cool. I'm sure someone's tried. Yeah, all right, dope. We're learning things today. Cardinal Doomsday is angry at my pronunciation of Leith. Apparently it is Lethy. I thought that was a YouTuber, but there you go. Wikipedia says Eridanos too. Well, you know, maybe there's some confusion over just how many rivers the Underworld has. Maybe there's a lack of evidence to determine definitively just how many bodies of water the Land of the Dead has. Someone will need to make an expedition. If you got any more questions, chuck them in the chat. But thank you all for coming to the stream. Thank you all for supporting Alt Shift X. I know it's been a long-ass time since we've actually got a video out. It takes a lot of time to get into a new series to an expert level from a total novice level. It takes a long time to read. And the thing about watching TV shows is that you can't do it fast unless you watch it double speed. It takes many hours to watch many episodes of a TV show. But it was fun to see everything, and there's a lot of cool ideas to talk about, and so I'm really pleased with how these videos are turning out. Alright, so thank you all again. You can listen back to this live stream later if you missed bits due to the internet dropping out, but it looks like it was pretty strong now. And I'll see you all next time. Cheers.